Okay.
Next up is our keynote conversation featuring Maria Ressa and Raney Aronson-Rath. And to set the stage for this conversation, I'd love to bring up Berkeley Journalism's Dean, Geeta Anand. A little bit about Geeta. Geeta is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author and the dean of our journalism school. Her stories on corporate corruption won the Wall Street Journal a Pulitzer Prize in 2002, and she was lead reporter in a series on healthcare that was a finalist in 2003. She wrote the nonfiction book The Cure, about a dad's fight to save his kids by starting a biotech company to make a medicine for their untreatable illness. This was made into a Harrison Ford movie, Extraordinary Measures. Geeta started her career at Cape Cod News and then went to the Rutland Herald in Vermont before becoming the City Hall bureau chief for the Boston Globe. She spent 17 years as a reporter and senior writer for the Wall Street Journal, and most recently, she was a foreign correspondent in India for the Journal and the New York Times. Geeta.
I'm so thrilled to be introducing two women who are both investigative journalists, both transformational leaders, and both people of extraordinary courage and astonishing resilience. They have personally produced over and over again extraordinary works of investigative journalism. And they have for many years led organizations producing extraordinary journalism. And year after year, they continue to lead their organizations despite enormous obstacles in extraordinarily difficult times. It is the great gift of the Logan Symposium that we occupy this space with them today. As you've heard from so many speakers, investigative reporting means pursuing documents and data, visuals and audio, pursuing interviews and gathering background information. It means stopping to ask yourself again and again, am I missing anything? Am I being fair? If I've gotten the facts right, great, that's key, but have I understood the historical context, the larger cultural and political context, and the big moral questions of our time? These are two women who exemplify what it means to be journalism leaders in the world today. Raney Aronson-Rath is the editor-in-chief and executive producer of FRONTLINE, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series. Under Raney's leadership, FRONTLINE has won every major award in broadcast journalism, including the series' first ever Peabody Institutional Award. Raney joined FRONTLINE staff as a senior producer in 2007 after producing notable FRONTLINE documentaries including News War, The Last Abortion Clinic, The Jesus Factor, Law and Disorder, and Postmortem. Prior to FRONTLINE, Raney worked at ABC News and the Wall Street Journal. I got to experience Raney's leadership soon after I became dean of the journalism school here at Berkeley 3 years ago. Raney invited David Barstow and me onto an introductory call about the ways we might work together. We were telling Raney about our students reporting on extremist activity in Oakland, including their securing an interview with a member of the Boogaloo Boys group who had shot law enforcement officers in Oakland. Oh my God, Raney said, we've been working with ProPublica on a story on extremism for months. We've been trying to get an interview with that person forever. Within days, FRONTLINE cameras were here in Berkeley interviewing our students. In that conversation with Raney, I saw her process information at a speed that was astonishing, understand how to move forward on a story with a clarity that was crystal clear, and exhibit a collaborative spirit that made us eager to do more work with her. All of a sudden, our students were characters in the Frontline documentary, American Insurrection. And under David's guidance, our students wrote a 3,500-word companion piece that ran in ProPublica. In a small way, this represents why Raney is such a transformational leader in investigative journalism. Not only does she have the brilliance to know what stories Frontline should be doing, and the boldness to deploy vast resources to covering these stories, but she can also fix them, sometimes through lightning speed collaborations with people like us, and make them into award-winning pieces. Our collaboration, American Insurrection, won a George Polk Award, among others, and she's incredibly generous in sharing credit. Welcome, Raney. And Maria Ressa, as all of you know, is an award-winning journalist who has been working in Asia for 35 years. She's the co-founder, executive editor, and CEO of Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. As Rappler's head, Maria has endured constant political harassment and arrests by the Duterte government, forced to post bail 9 times to stay free. Maria's battle for truth and democracy was the subject of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival documentary, 1,000 Cuts. Before founding Rappler, Maria worked as a journalist for CNN in Southeast Asia. Much of her work focused on investigating terrorism. She opened and ran CNN's Manila bureau for nearly a decade, and then opened the network's Jakarta bureau, which she ran for the next decade. She wrote Seeds of Terror, an eyewitness account of Al-Qaeda's newest center of operations in Southeast Asia, and also From Bin Laden to Facebook, 10 Days of Abduction, 10 Years of Terrorism. As you all know, to be investigative journalists means to dig, to persist, to be curious, to be fair. And it also requires a huge amount of courage. Courage to tell people things they don't want to know, things that they don't want to believe, things that they never wanted to be revealed to the world. And it also means having the courage to stand up against threats to your own safety, to your own life. And that is what Maria has done. She stayed in her country and continued the work of journalism despite the persistent, real, and constant threats from her government. Not all of us can do that. But I would argue that if we, as investigative journalists, are willing to put at risk the personal safety of others, including whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg and Reality Winner, then we as journalists have to be willing also to put our own lives and our own safety on the line. That kind of moral courage is what is required to be an investigative journalist and a true leader in journalism. Maria Ressa epitomizes that courage. I will now turn over the microphone to Raney to engage Maria in what I know will be an illuminating and inspiring, and yes, perhaps also a life-changing conversation for all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta, and thank you for your leadership. As you can tell, I'm a little under the weather. I'm not contagious, though, I promise. I want to say that Geeta's a great writer. I've never had an introduction that was so specific and anecdotal, so thank you, Geeta. And it was a real honor to be asked to have a conversation with Maria Ressa. David Barstow, who's sitting right here, called me on the phone a number of months ago and said, "Is there any way you and Maria could be here together?" And here she is. I just want to say, here she is. No. Here. There are people in this room that understand what Maria's been through. And actually, there have been times through the years that I've known Maria that we were really trying to get her to come to the United States. We were working hard together, and she wasn't able to come many times. And I just want to just take a moment, thank you for your work, and thank you for your bravery, because here you are, and it's a remarkable thing. And for all of you in the audience knowing Maria so well, what I just want to say to you is this is the end of a couple of amazing, inspiring days. And I want you to be ready with your questions. This is your chance to talk to Maria Ressa. And I've talked to her a lot. And she deeply moves me. And she's someone who makes me believe that the work that we all do has purpose and is worth doing day in and day out, despite the challenges, because she's doing it. And her amazing team, her Rappler team, you know, I have met them many times in the films that we've made. I have seen their work, young, incredibly inspiring people. And in fact, I just want to give a shout out to the Rappler journalists that you have worked with for so many years, because it's not just Maria, it's her entire staff. I see some of you in the audience who know this with tears in your eyes. Thank you for that, because these are the people who are on the front lines doing this really important work. And I have to say that they move me so deeply, and they put everything into perspective about what we face here, as hard and challenging as it is. So thank you again, Maria. I have to also add that the UC Berkeley journalists, this is not about you for 1 second, really reminded me of those Rappler journalists. I mean, the people we collaborated with that Geeta mentioned, they were remarkable, the people that David worked so hard with. Those journalists cracked a story that so many veteran journalists on my team and across the country couldn't crack. And I believe that the younger generation, there's a lot of you in this room today, you are going to be paving the way for all of us, and thank you for your efforts, because we need you. And please, we need you. So I want to tell you how I met Maria Ressa. It was in an edit room. She wasn't there, but she was on the screen. And she was talking about Facebook, and actually Anya Borg is in the crowd today, and we made a film called The Facebook Dilemma. This is years ago. And they showed me their rough cut, and in it was this person, Maria Ressa, who I had seen, right? She's doing newscasts. She was someone that I knew, but she was talking about the perils of Facebook. And I've told Maria this, but it was a light bulb moment where I think we all realized the seriousness of what we were dealing with in terms of mis and disinformation was so deep and so dark that I better pay attention. And in fact, we watched the whole interview because I was so curious. I knew it couldn't all make the film, but I was so curious. What did Maria have to say? And this is actually well before a lot of the retribution that you faced. You were helping us understand, and I hope you will today as well, understand what was then going to be happening in the United States. And that's how I met her, was in an edit room. I was awestruck, and here we are today. It's just really remarkable. The next film we did was 1,000 Cuts, and a lot of you have seen that. If you haven't, you should stream it. I got to get the plug in. It's free on PBS. And essentially, you should watch it because you see her life unfold, and that's where I'm going to start. Thank you for being here.
Wait, before she does that, right? So you can kind of see the mutual admiration. I am like significantly older than
Not
this
really, by the
this
way.
news leader, right? But I think that news journalism in general faces such a difficult time right now. And before we move into the details, it's really at the top of it, which is what's our business going to look like? What are our news managers going to do? And you know, the reason I work so closely with Raney is because this is the future of news leadership. We have to stick close to our standards and ethics, despite the fact that the way we're distributed lacks standards and ethics.
And she's taught me a lot about that through the years as we actually together, behind the scenes, troubleshoot things like publishing on YouTube, publishing on Facebook. What are the ramifications of that when you're swimming in those waters? What do you need to be aware of and alert about? So I was hoping, we're doing another film with her, by the way. It's going to come out soon-ish. We'll take our time. But I want you to take me to the Philippines right now. Marcos Jr. is
Oh, wow.
right. We got to just go there. There's a scene in the upcoming film that is remarkable, and it is when you all realize in the newsroom that Marcos Jr. won. Let's just start there. How did that happen?
You know, in the book that just came out last year, it was a moment where you realized, you know that Milan Kundera quote, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And, you know, we could see how social media, how technology had really helped us forget when this stuff moves exponentially faster. We knew the power of media before that, if you work in television journalism, but this was like unbridled. When it happened, oh my gosh, he's the only son and namesake of Ferdinand Marcos. So 36 years after the people power revolt that ousted the father, the guy who the Swiss banks got rid of their secrecy banking laws, and it was actually someone in California, it was the San Jose Mercury News, Lou Simons, who did the actual shoe leather reporting to show that $10 billion had been siphoned from the Philippines. So here comes his son, campaigned like his father, ran the songs of his father, cut his hair like his father, and he won. And a lot of that was really because of two reasons. It was because the technology that distributes the news allowed the changing, his information operations began in 2014, and it turned the name Marcos from a kleptocrat to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. And, you go to like some of the poorest parts of the Philippines, of Manila, our capital, and you ask people, why did you vote for Marcos? And they'll say, because of the gold. And this is something that had spread on YouTube, that it's called the Taliana gold, that if you vote for Marcos, you're going to get gold. If they believe Alex Jones, they believe they're going to get gold, right? So that's one of the ways. And the other part, of course, is just that even though Marcos had been gone for 36 years, the underpinning of the political structure, this is old-style journalism, because those problems never went away. We just added more on top, right? So the dynasty politics of the Philippines, they just came right back up and helped deliver the votes. So, sorry, I didn't answer your question. How did it feel?
No, she did, right? What you did was you talked very directly about how he was able to reshape his name. It's a remarkable story. In the film that's going to come out soon, we actually show how the rural part of the Philippines in particular was mobilized behind Marcos and the type of information they were receiving. I want you to relate that to here. Do you want me to go closer?
Oh, they're, okay, sure.
We like good production.
I know, no problem.
Yeah, so if you take that,
Yeah.
We're going into obviously 2024. We're going to be talking about that for a little while. I hope you all will have questions for her too, as you think of your reporting in the next year and a half. How do you relate what happened in the Philippines? You do this so well to what is happening here, the sort of under the brush, the wildfire that we're starting to see.
Everything that has. So first, understand that the attacks against America, and I will look at 9/11 and let's say Cambridge Analytica, because that's an easy one, right? We first were the guinea pigs for you. In 9/11, Ramzi Youssef, the guy behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, his uncle was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. In 1995, they lived in the Philippines, and they had Filipina girlfriends who opened bank accounts for them. They tested how to get through airport security through Philippine Airlines, because the Philippines has the same airport security as the United States, but far easier. So the two biggest stories of my career were about how the attacks against America were first tested in our country. When 9/11 happened, I remembered a document, an interrogation report of probably the first pilot recruited by Al Qaeda, and in that document, which was shared with the U.S., it was a Philippine police interrogation report. It said that this guy, Abdul Hakim Murad, had a plot to hijack commercial planes and crash them into buildings. Sorry, hijack planes and crash them into buildings. And then it named the buildings: the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, San Francisco, the Transamerica building in San Francisco, a bunch of other stuff, right? So that was 9/11, and then here we come with information operations or information warfare. In 2016, this is when we came under attack, first online, right? That online attack is the same methodology, whether it is in the Philippines, in the UK, in America. It's you say a lie a million times, bottom up, it becomes a fact. You pound, and when you target, most of the time the targets are journalists, when you target someone, this is free speech, pounding that target into silence, right? So there's this, and then the other effect of that is kind of like a astroturfing effect to impact everyone else who see parts of the elephant. Sorry, the easy part of this is that by 2018, MIT came out with a study that said lies spread at least 6 times faster than facts. The world is turned upside down by the design of the platforms. If lies spread faster than facts, what does that do to journalism, right? And then beyond that, what does that do to everything else? That creates cascading failures, right? If you can't hold power to account, if you, I've said these 3 sentences like over and over, makes me feel like Cassandra and Sisyphus combined. If you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we have no shared reality. We cannot solve any problems. You cannot have journalism. You cannot have democracy. So that's the fundamental problem.
You have solutions?
And you
No.
have to laugh. No, but
No.
here we are, journalists still doing what
Right.
we do, despite the fact that over the last decade, you see the risks have increased a lot more. And, you know, this is actually my 37th year as a journalist, and we're still going. And in 2016, when we decided to fight the cases that were being thrown against us, my lawyers actually said, "Are you sure?" I mean, what was the option?
Right, what's the option? So I want to ask a question about the shared reality. So when you say that, just be a little bit, drill into that a little more.
Sure.
What do you mean? I mean, we just saw Alex Jones, right? We just saw a very good example of that.
Yeah. I mean, look, the shared reality is here we are in this auditorium, right? This is the Logan Symposium. But if somebody was doing information operations and bombards, because in the past, think about this. This is from a book called Socialnomics, which came out a long time ago at the beginning of social media, that anything we do in the physical world, if you push it up to the virtual world, spreads times 4. Right? So if it's times 4, now someone comes along and bombards us to say, this is happening in Amsterdam. And for the rest of the world looking, they'll probably think it's happening in Amsterdam. Okay, that's one. That's information operations. But then think about it like this, how if every person in this room has a personalized feed, that's the foundation of social media, right? You have a personalized feed. And if we don't have a shared reality, which is what news organizations did, there was an editorial agenda for the day, a news agenda that journalists are trained to push up, right? Out of thousands of stories a day, you will be able, because you have experience, because you're accountable to the public, you have the ability to pull up the news agenda of the day. All right, so now here you are in all of our personalized feeds. You know, the only time I think that everyone has their own version of reality is in an insane asylum. I mean, that's a little bit of like, but it's true, right? We need, in order for society to function, we need a shared reality. And I guess the other part is, again, think about this. In the Philippines, Asia's largest Roman Catholic nation, I would always say the incentive structure has been turned upside down. Thou shalt not lie is part of the 10 Commandments. And yet, if you want your story, or you want to be an influencer like Alex Jones was for years and years and years to 9.2 billion, you lie. You lace it with anger and hate. Mm-hmm. This is our biology being used against us, right? Imagine if you told your kid, lie, I'm going to reward you. Lie all the time, I'll keep rewarding you. What does that do to your child? What kind of person do they become? And the impact of this is not just personally, you've seen this in the United States, the impact personally on Capitol Hill on January 6th, right? But the flip side, groups. We behave differently in groups. And this is stuff that I did when I was tracking terrorist networks in Southeast Asia. This is from the 60s, the Ash conformity studies, the Milgram studies, where if an authority gives you the ability to keep doing electric shocks, you guys familiar with that, right? So you can kill somebody with a perfectly clear conscience because you've been given approval to do this. Look at what we have now been given approval to do. So that's at a group level. What does that mean to all of us, right? And this is something, there's no studies really that have been done about this yet, but there should be emergent human behavior, right? This stuff that is here, I'm supposed to be far away from the mic. Even the mic knows it's bad for it, right? This stuff literally is mildly addictive. There's a book called Dopamine Nation, right? Not only is it mildly addictive, the business model to keep you scrolling has an impact on this outrage attention economy has an impact on your attention span. It went from being 10 seconds to 3 seconds. It has an impact on your ability if you're pushed full of toxic sludge. That's what I wound up calling this in the Nobel lecture, toxic sludge. Are you prone to think people are good? Why is everything a gladiatorial battle to the death? So everything we've discussed so far, online violence, is real-world violence. That's something we've found out. Alex Jones, why was that even allowed in the first place? Why does this reality supersede all of the laws that have been in place to keep us safe?
So I don't want to go darker here, but I heard.
Well, we won't depress you all the time.
Where do you think I'm going? A lot of you heard the professor who spoke about ChatGPT today, right? And it was so horrifying that I was getting text messages from all my friends in the audience as I flew here, like, you can't believe this. And they're literally texting me these incredible quotes. And I will go back and listen, David, to the audio. So take this now. I was actually thinking about it on the plane. We've been reporting on the social platforms. So now I just want you to go a few steps further to the world that we're all swimming in.
Yeah.
And laws and regulations haven't caught up, obviously.
We haven't learned.
We have the Writers Guild strikes, which is potentially interesting if that happens, in which they're now lacing into their contract lines about this.
Yeah.
And it's just such a new territory for all of us. I'd love for you just to meditate on that for a while.
Yeah, so can I just say, first, I think we have a window that is closing quickly to help save, journalism is only one part, to help save democracy. And a lot of that is because of the tech that connects us, and I have tons of friends in technology, but we didn't have a business model for it. We didn't have a name for it until 2019, when it was called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. So what is this new AI. The first AI, and you guys know this, right, is how every single post you do is pulled together by machine learning, very rudimentary AI, and it builds a model of you that includes all of your relationships, includes your anger, your fear, your hopes, your dreams, right? And then that model is pulled up by another more sophisticated AI, and that becomes the motherlode database that is used for micro-targeting. Micro-targeting is the new advertising of these companies. These are the ones, so micro-targeting is nothing like advertising of media at all, right? Because this uses it's almost like it's your weakest moment to a message sold to the highest bidder. Now change the word model and replace it with clone, right? So did you give permission that your clone is owned by the company that used machine learning to build your model? That's the first time the AI hit us. And when that happened, you already see the cascading failures. It has geopolitical effects beyond this stuff, right? What is that? Like more and more, okay, VDEM, this is from Sweden. Last year they said 60% of the world is under autocratic rule. This year's report is 72% of the world is under autocratic rule. That's in 1 year. And then the world is now rolled back to 1986 levels of democracy, but Asia Pacific, where I come from, is 1978 levels. That was the first rudimentary AI. Let's move to like this new AI. So we all agree on this, right? Like what makes GPT interesting is because it begins to formulate text the way a human mind does, except with like supercharged. So I am, and then here, these are like the parameters of how often, right? GPT-2 was 1.5 billion, swinging through here. GPT-3 was 175 billion. GPT-4, which was just released, is 1 trillion, right? And GPT-4 has the capacity to create emergent behavior. And now it sounds science fiction. All right, so what's ChatGPT? It's built on GPT-3, but if you pay that $20, you'll get GPT-4, which is the one that can create. The tech guys will tell you it's hallucinating. How nice that word is, right? But it's actually self-creating as well, using us as the fodder. We still haven't learned. Anyway, so the danger, did I mention I'm a science fiction fan? We have to imagine this, because when you ask them, Sam Altman of OpenAI talks about how dangerous this is, and please, if you talk to him, then ask him, why did you release it? Right? Because in the end, I always say this, right? Like, I say that you think about the fact that this stuff on tech, I drank the Kool-Aid. We built Rappler on Facebook, right? This is anyway, let me put it this way. Disinformation, just in case you still don't really believe this. Yuri Andropov, former KGB chair, said that disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. You know what cocaine addicts, you take it all the time, you become a changed person. That's the first generation of AI, right? Like you think about it this way. So why do we not have laws preventing the manipulation of our emotions that change the way we think of the world or look at the world, that change the way we act? Sorry, it's such a long thing, but I'll just say there's
I don't think people are bored. I'm looking at your faces. No one is falling asleep, Maria. I mean, you all look alert after 2 days, so.
The reason I'm so emphatic about this is we have the data, and it is evidence-based. If we did the data for Marcos's rise to power, we released it to our audience, and you know that the best investigative reporting, while it has impact, doesn't spread on social media, right? So anyway, so I guess the last thing I'll say is there are two groups that actually brought this dystopian world together for us. And it is going to get worse unless something significant is done. The first are the tech companies. You're here in California. Let your voice be heard, please. You know, the second are the governments. I was with Chris Wiley and we were talking about how Chris Wiley, the Facebook whistleblower, the only guy who's been banned completely, unlike former President Trump. He's banned completely from Facebook and Instagram. Anyway, this whistleblower, the connection to the Philippines. America had the most number of compromised accounts. The country with the second most number of compromised accounts in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the Philippines. So we were the test cases, we were the guinea pigs, you were the targets. And we still didn't learn. The second group that abdicated responsibility are our governments. So I told you, Chris said that to get a toaster in your house, that toaster has more laws and regulations than this, right? And I'll end with E.O. Wilson, who studied, he was a Harvard professor who studied emergent behavior in ants. I'm very big on emergent behavior because emergent behavior means that you cannot predict what the whole is going to look like from the individual parts, right? So he said the greatest crisis we face are our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology. And he said this many, many, many years ago. We still haven't learned.
Thank you, Maria. I knew you were going to help us understand the world that we're already in. And I feel like, having talked to you all these years, I think that one of the things that I've noticed in our reporting, and this includes Frontline too, is I think we keep saying we're going into this world. Like, we're like here right now. And I think that would be useful for us all to just accept that and just, we're here. There's a few people from Frontline in the audience, and I'm looking at you right now because this is stuff that we all need to just really, truly do a better job on our side. You know, speaking for Frontline, that we need to really start reporting aggressively around this and additionally around this. So I wanted to ask the audience if you would mind if we take about 10 to 15 minutes for your questions. I have like 30 other questions, and I've talked to her for years. So I want to just open it up for questions. Tell me who you are. I really would love to know that. I'm sure Maria would too. So we'll walk around, do some questions right here would be wonderful. And I think there's a mic. Sorry, I sprung this on them.
Well, while the mic is coming to you, you know what? I think we can do a better job telling the public what is happening to us, right? But we don't want to be alarmist because tech is not going to go away. How do we move it forward? As journalists, we need to get our hands around it. And frankly, I think for the tech guys, they need journalists involved in what they're building.
Hi, my name's Rosine Breed. Better?
Hi.
Hi, my name's Rosina Breen. I'm the CEO and Editor-in-Chief at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London.
Oh.
I saw you at the Skoll Convention in Oxford in the UK a couple of weeks ago. It was inspiring, and I quoted a line from you at an event we held in Parliament last week. You said on the role of journalists in defending and protecting democracy, we should not have to suffer this much to give you freedom. It was a really powerful line. The Bureau was co-hosting the event at Westminster. It was an anti-SLAPP event because we are being sued. And that case has been condemned as a SLAPP by 20 human rights and freedom of speech groups. It's pressure, it's time, it's money, it's costing hundreds of thousands of pounds on all sides. And as only you too well know, intimidation takes its toll. But we are determined to drive changes to UK law. You said at the start of your conversation that journalism is at a difficult place
right now. And so my question, I suppose, is what your guiding advice is to journalists in the room right now.
Those were my questions after this, because I think it's wonderful to actually spend some time on that for all of us.
Yeah. So I'll take this apart in three ways. You know, the first, because I run Rappler and we created Rappler, is the business model, right? Our business model is broken. And in America, you kind of make up for some of that with philanthropic money. But even the established news organizations, maybe FRONTLINE excluded, because we all have to raise money for this. In how to stand up to a dictator, this whole debate comes down to power and money. And the only professionals who stand up to power and money are the journalists, guided by standards and ethics manual, right? That is accountable to the public. So that's the first. I just came from Amsterdam, where De Krooijne is celebrating its 145th year, and it's a whole different time now. People will tell you, you bring your community together. But we also know now that the community, in many instances, India being one of them, right? If they are the subject of information operations or information warfare, their perspectives change, and we live longer and longer in Stranger Things, the upside down. Mm-hmm. We're literally in the upside down. Okay, so again, remember, micro-targeting is not advertising, but this now accounts micro-targeting. These tech platforms now, in many of the countries, have 80 to 90% of advertising that used to go to media. I think the second thing is we have to be prepared for lawsuits, right? And this is the same way. And hand in hand with the lawsuits is the loss of confidence, the loss of credibility of our audience for us, because we are targeted. I can show you all the data for this. So the methodology is the same in any country. Bottom-up social media attacks comes down from the top. In my case, it was a year. President Duterte, then, the meta-narrative that seeded doesn't seem so bad at the beginning. It was journalist equals criminal. Who knew that I would have 10 arrest warrants in 2019? So 2017, President Duterte comes top down, says the same thing, journalist equals criminal. A week later, I get my first subpoena. 2018, the government tries to shut us down. Within 4 months, we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. And we would have that war of attrition would have worked if we didn't pivot to find a sustainable business model. And it isn't advertising, it is tech and data. Right? So if you're not working with data, begin. So 2019, I keep getting arrest warrants. In fact, Richard Gingras, who's sitting here, like I walked out of a Google event and then walked into an arrest warrant, a second or third arrest in the Philippines. 2019, 10 arrest warrants. Oh, the good news, of those 10, 7 are gone. Mm-hmm. There's 3 left.
I'm gonna get there. It's amazing.
Sorry. All right, I'll shut up. That's the third. The fourth is because the business model is eroding, right? I think we need to learn to collaborate better. And this is part of what you heard FRONTLINE is doing. We need to bring in a whole of society approach to protect the facts. And I would say the last thing to respond to your question is that we have to tell our communities, our audiences, because we've spent the other way, as if news organizations still feel like we have power. Mm-hmm. FRONTLINE does have, but
she's just being nice.
No, I almost feel like when I'm talking to news heads, it's a vestigial power. It's like a tail that we lost a long time ago. We don't have that power anymore, right? So what do we have? What do we do? The incentive structure of distribution is against us. If you write a really good piece, you had better have a whole of society approach distribution model. That means moving out of what we used to just call journalism. It's part of the reason now I'm not actually part of the editorial team. What I do is I do tech, data, and our business, and civic engagement, which is the last part. One of the things that gives me hope right? Because how do you solve this? In the long term, it's education. In the medium term, it's legislation. In the short term, it is just us. So moving into that election of May 9th, when Marcos was overwhelmingly elected, we began a whole of society approach. It became kind of like an influencer marketing campaign for facts. And I pitched this idea to Richard Gingras, who's in the audience.
And
right?
he has a question, which is good.
So Google News, yes, one of those tech guys, but this is the good, one of the good. So Google News Initiative came in and said, we like that idea, whole of society approach, 4-layer pyramid, 16 news organizations at the bottom doing fact checks. We all know fact checks are boring. That's like whack-a-mole and doesn't spread on social media. So what's the second layer about? We called it the mesh. The second layer is 114 civil society groups, students, businessmen, the church, artists, filmmakers, cartoonists, who then took their feed and we organized them so that every day they share those really boring fact checks with emotion. And they couldn't use anger. I'll tell you what we found out. The third layer are academic institutions. And what we found out is academic institutions tend to not have that much data, which is sometimes some of their ideas are kind of way off, right? or will take like a decade, and you're here in the trenches, and you're going, please save me, So what we did is we worked with Midan, another San Francisco, Midan, that's the Czech, and they put a data pipeline that connects all 4 layers of the pyramid. And for the academics who didn't have data scientists, we processed the data for them. For the ones who did, we gave them access to all the data from the bottom up. Every week, leading to the elections, they told our people who was being attacked, what were the narratives. We used network analysis and natural language processing. The 4th layer is the most important one, lawyers. The left to right, the law groups in the Philippines, and they were so excited because they finally jumped in, and in less than 3 months, they filed more than 20 cases to protect the people in the pyramid. Oh yeah, Google News Initiative shouldn't hear about those cases. Anyway, no, so what is that, right? That whole of society approach, here's the takeaway for you. We found out that inspiration spreads as fast as anger.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
But Marcos was still elected.
Marcos was still elected, but it was amazing. And you've told me about the genesis of that. And the first time you explained it, I had no idea what she was actually explaining to me. But as I learned more, and you should look at it because it's an incredible case study. I just want to add something to the mix. You did say that we should all be prepared for lawsuits. I think that's something really serious that she said that I know that you all think about. And one thing that we do a lot at Frontline is we sort of fortify behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We vet, it's really hard on producers and directors and journalists, but what we do on the editorial team at Frontline is we actually look at every single edit that's in your film. We actually look at how you gathered the material. We look at things that we know when something might be discovered, could be literally thought as bias, right? And we're looking at this under the hood. We're basically having an under the hood approach right now to fortify what we publish. And that process is arduous. The other thing we're doing lately, and this is 3 or 4 years in now, is we're publishing a lot of our underlying video materials. We used to publish our text transcripts, but now we're actually publishing. We're proactively sharing with the public our underlying materials, and we call it the Transparency Project. And millions of people watch this material because people want to know, is what is in a Frontline film, is it biased, right? Is it real? Was it edited out of context? And we basically are standing behind it so much so that we want the public to know what's behind the scenes. And it doesn't mean we won't get sued, but it means that we're doing everything we can underneath our process to make sure that our facts are right, that we've asked ourselves the right questions, that we've reported against ourselves, and we've talked a lot about that, right? Which is a great method, obviously, that you all do. And I think that's helpful too, just as some hope in the room.
But again, like what's the difference? That's a thinking slow process. The
Yeah, that's a thinking
manipulation
slow.
is
That's
a
right.
thinking fast
That's true.
process, right? So that's why I feel like we are constantly, it's like when we first came out on social media, we're handcuffed, because you're not gonna say, I hate this person on social media. I mean, if you do, what's your standards and ethics and manual saying, right? So in this way, I feel, when we had this discussion, I was like, my gosh, journalists do so much, and yet the distribution system allows blatant lies. How did Alex Jones get 9.2 billion followers, and why do they believe him? Because partly, the design of the platform helped it, and he, like other countries like Russia, geopolitical power, take advantage of the design of this, right? So this should be, it's almost, it's very, very difficult. The longer this continues without concrete laws and America's kind of a mess in this, and it was really American tech companies that started it. Now you have TikTok, and it's interesting that American lawmakers are going to regulate TikTok, but they're not going to regulate Facebook or Instagram.
That's amazing. Okay, Richard Gingras.
Thank you. First of all, Maria, we agree on just about everything, including your earlier point about collaboration, and not only collaboration within the environment of journalism, but beyond. And obviously, as you well know from me, I think every company, including tech companies for sure, and in media companies, need to think very carefully about their own behavior. All right, because if you've got media, it's like we can't think of media companies as all about the truth, because we know that's not the case either. Okay. You outlined the problem, I think, in a very, very articulate and sound fashion, including several key points. One, your point about research about human behavior, the Milgram study. I look at David Goleman's work, who basically says, we're not rational beings, we're tribal beings.
Right.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Right? How do you...
that tribal, the in-out group theory, right? Like, this is what's tearing apart race, it's identity politics, it is immigration. All of those hot-button issues have now gotten worse. Sorry, go ahead, Richard.
That's a challenge to fix. The technology, the internet has enabled free expression at large to the point of our harm. Not likely to roll back, not even wise to roll that back. It's there.
Yeah.
Then we get to that question of the notion of smart regulation. And that's really the core of my question, because that too, as you know, and I've been dealing with this around the world, I struggle with, because we're asking politicians, who, by the way, are driven by, in their own success, to manipulate people's thinking.
Right.
And who, in every piece of misinformation legislation I have so far seen around the world, the first thing they do is exempt themselves from the regulations, including prohibiting the tech companies from taking their content down. So the question I ask is, because it's the question I struggle with, is what do you think are solutions that are attainable in the regulatory sphere or beyond?
I'll talk first, the first generation of AI. Our first contact is what Tristan Harris will say, right? If you first contact AI with humanity, and that's created all of these issues. In the Nobel lecture in 2021, I actually asked to reform or revoke Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. You know why? Who's accountable for this? It isn't just Alex Jones who spread it, right? Think about algorithms of distribution, and I'm just going to talk about two algorithms, right? In How to Stand Up with a Dictator, the chapter title is How Friends of Friends Broke Democracy. One simple algorithm of growth that's used to grow your own social network versus the entire platform. They both grow simultaneously if you grow your own, right? So they've all decided that friends of friends, recommending friends of friends to you, makes you click it more and you grow. And because you grow, they grow. What does friends of friends do? In 2016 in the Philippines, we didn't debate the facts. But if you're pro-Duterte, you moved further right. If you're anti-Duterte, you moved further left. And the politics followed the algorithm that distributed the content, right? So that's friends of friends. So the other one that's interesting to me is, and Richard, I mean, I think we discussed this very briefly, but this is work done by Jonas Kaiser in Brazil. This is, so think Bolsonaro, but you can also maybe extrapolate to your own president's past. In this one, he showed that the recommendation, the clustering algorithm of the recommendation engine for YouTube actually took Bolsonaro's far-right fringe with every single conspiracy theory you can think of in Brazil. And then these groups would never have met in the real world, but they clustered them all together and they grew, and this formed the support base for Bolsonaro's rise to the presidency. So the question for tech is, you know, they'll always say, again, Richard exempted maybe, no, but tech will say they mirror reality. They do not mirror reality, they are creating it, and they are manipulating the worst of our humanity, right? In order to get that there. And this is part of the reason I think about these as cascading failures, right? Having said that, the quick answer is, if you reform or revoke 230, I would go revoke, because that's the easiest one, because every day that we allow this insidious manipulation to continue changes your emotions and changes the way you look at the world. And so if you do that, that would mean that the tech companies are going to have to be responsible for what they distribute, right? Okay, so what does that mean if they distribute? Because what they would say then is that, well, then that's like censoring us. We're like the phone company. We just, you know, connect you. That's also not true. That's not true, because what they do is, think of a definition for algorithm is, and I'm not the first to say this, but this is a great definition, opinion in code. It was like they replicated Raney a million times. Raney is a great editor, right? But what if they replicated the worst editor? Who doesn't care, who has no standards and ethics, who will make you evil because you will stay on. So replicate that a million times, right? And that's the content that gets distributed. In the Nobel lecture, I called it toxic sludge. So that creates our new reality. So Section 230 for America, I mean, in the EU, I spent most of the last 2 years really focused on the tech, on these regulations, because if we don't do it at that level, we can't do our jobs. You know, I think about like a river of information, right? This is what connects us. And every time we talk content moderation, it's a downstream problem here. It's like you're taking a glass, scooping up water, cleaning it up, and then dumping the water back in. The factory of lies is upstream. It's here. So we have to shut the factory down. Richard is working on these laws as well, and there are many, many countries, there are a few countries I can think of right now, too, that have allowed power, and this would be the power of big media, to help dictate, like, for example, I'll use one, C-18 in Canada, for example. This is a law that's coming out. If Rappler was in Canada, the big news organizations would win, but Rappler would not get anything, right? So having said that, let me make it very simple. What was lifted was accountability, and what was given was impunity, right? So we have to stop the impunity. In my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, not enough people are pulling out of it that the dictator I'm referring to is not just Rodrigo Duterte, it is Mark Zuckerberg, right? And who has more power? Mark Zuckerberg, right? And so that last part, stop the impunity. I am not a criminal, but many people in the Philippines think I am because Facebook said so.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, who has another question? I saw a bunch of hands go up before. Lowell, and just tell us who you are. You don't need to tell me who you are, but tell me who you are.
Right. So I'm the emeritus Logan professor. But the question I get from the arguments that you're presenting in the United States
Yes.
is the First Amendment. the current definitions of the First Amendment in our legal community would not allow any regulation like that. And furthermore, Section 230 doesn't have a chance of being repealed on a practical
I know,
level.
because of your
or-
politics, yeah.
Or otherwise for the Supreme Court or Congress. So where is the hope to do anything here in this country from your perspective and Raney's perspective, number one? And number two, what do you think of the EU laws that have just been passed over
Yeah.
the last year and which there is going to be a big conflict over in the next 6 months?
Yeah, yeah.
Why don't you start, good question. Why don't you start with the EU, if you don't mind, because that was one of my questions as well.
Yeah, sure. So I testified many times in the EU because we wanted to move it away from speech. This isn't a freedom of speech issue. This is a distribution issue. It is the way that the platforms are designed. Who spreads lies over facts? And if you are going to be that unprincipled, I mean, it already went from amoral to immoral. Is it evil when genocide happens in Myanmar, right? And in Myanmar, to remind you, both Meta and the United Nations sent people to Myanmar, and they pointed out that these American social media companies, Facebook in particular, enabled this. So I feel like every time someone says that this is a free speech issue, it's also partly because, well, we all know Elon Musk has come up, right? But it isn't a free speech issue. Stop the distribution, hold them accountable to the distribution, and that connects to what the EU has done. We tried very hard, and the last time I testified, I was with Frances Haugen in this last chunk. We have the data, I'll tweet them. You can actually look at the way Marcos did this. What networks? And it was Marcos and Duterte clustered networks that spread the lies. They're recidivist networks. But recidivist as in like terrorist, the way okay, I'm putting too much together. Let me just focus on, it isn't a free speech issue at all, and I think that we can regulate the distribution, because the fundamental thing, so here's the other part where I think American lawmakers get lost, because the tech lobbies bring them down this road. Mm-hmm. The lawmakers feel like they need to understand the nitty-gritty of technology. They actually don't. When they regulate, when you put building codes in place, do you know how to hammer a nail? Do you know how to pour concrete? You don't, but we can see this physically. This is a little bit harder. It's like OpenAI and whatever, all of the ChatGPT stuff that's coming out. You have to imagine it. But I think you can ask for fundamental principles. If they disclosed, for example, what's in the design? What's this algorithm do? Oh, that algorithm spreads lies 6 times faster. Which regulator would not allow that? Right? I mean, which regulator would allow that? Is the right thing, right? Because this is our public sphere. And there is nothing protecting any of us in this public sphere. But when we're out in the real world, in the physical world, you can't even yell fire in a movie theater. There are rules. I've been a reporter in war zones when people are shooting at each other, when people run through traffic lights. We voluntarily subscribe to these rules. In the virtual world, I think part of the problem is the internet doesn't have a democratic 21st century design. We have to help in this. So, I'm sorry, I blew it out more, but I guess it's distribution. It's the fact that surveillance capitalism, that model, we did come up with a 10-point action plan. And then I'll go to this country. The 10-point action plan in September last year, Dmitry Muratov and I, along with about a dozen Nobel laureates and about 150 different civil society groups, a lot of them from Europe, because we were jumping off the EU, what the EU was doing. So far, these 2 laws, there's a European Democracy Action Plan, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act are in, and by the end of the year, they'll all kick in. There's a clause, Section 12, that actually says these companies are going to have to give real-time data. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to do this, right? But they don't quite know yet what to do with that real-time data. So we have to be part of that discussion. People who build, who know, right? It's dystopian if we don't. I don't think we can survive this. You know, I just to give you the last part, we think in our research that 2024 is the tipping point against democracy. Starting January this year, there are 90 elections globally. If you don't have integrity of facts, and you have information warfare, right? If you don't have integrity of facts, how do you have integrity of elections? It isn't a coincidence that we are electing more illiberal leaders democratically. Like in my country, what happened with Duterte was the institutions were crumbled from within, and they don't stay in their countries. They ally with each other. Would Belarus be a democracy today if Russia didn't come in? Right? So I guess I keep saying we think that Ukraine is out there, but you're in a battle every day here. Sorry, to give you the answer for America, you should tell me, Lowell. I mean, part of the problem is people think it's a political problem. It isn't. The reason this happened is because the corruption of the information ecosystem is built in by design by the new gatekeepers.
Do you have a response? Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, except journalists I talk to about, say, who's going to decide here? Are we going to let the government of the United States decide what should be said or what shouldn't be said? What's your plan here in the United States trying to do that? The other thing that I hear in Europe is these EU regulations could be used by the current government in Hungary, for instance, to suppress the press further. So how do you? It's like the Gordian knot, or the fact that we are not willing, for instance, we don't teach it really in journalism schools, for instance, that for 100 years almost, well, actually it was 70 years, we did have regulation on electronic media as to content in this country.
Yes.
We could not have had Rush Limbaugh before 1987. We have it today because we lifted all those regulations, and the internet was born into that world. And journalists, lawyers I talk to, the dean of the law school here, are all afraid of giving that power back to the government.
My quick answer to you on this is that the government abdicated responsibility for it and gave it to tech, and tech chose to spread lies, right? I guess what I'm saying is if we do not act, we accept the system that technology put in place, which will kill journalism, which will kill democracy, right? So this is, and that why did I say, oh, I forgot to tell you the 3 buckets of the 10-point action plan. I won't give you all 10 points, but the 3 buckets. 1, stop surveillance for profit, right? They do not get a chance to print money at our expense. 2, stop coded bias. It's a film. Coded Bias is a film that was in Sundance the same year, 2020. But what do I mean by that? In 2017, when we looked at our data from the attacks on social media, women journalists were attacked at least 10 times more than men. If you look at UNESCO and International Center for Journalists, there's a 300-page book there now that shows you women are attacked. Women journalists in particular are targets far more than men. And I can show you some of the stuff I've had to deal with. They are, a German friend of mine actually said the dehumanization part is exactly what the Nazis did to the Jews. That coded bias, I think, isn't just women journalists. De Corona, which is the news magazine that I just came from, they did a study on women politicians. The women politicians are getting pounded as well, right? It is changing our societies. Women researchers on disinformation are getting pounded. So stop coded bias is the second one. But the third most important one, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. Because when journalists can't do our jobs, all hell breaks loose. Power gets absolute power, and that is actually what we're seeing, right? But I guess look, I just saw a clip from Bill Maher with Elon Musk. We have to know the tech. We have to ask questions from these tech guys that will make them answer, because it is in their interests to keep us thinking it's a First Amendment and that we can't do anything about it.
Thank you. There's a question in the back. Yes.
Hello, thank you so much for this very inspiring and enlightening panel. I'm Mui Xiao. I'm a China reporter at the New York Times. I'm from China. So my question for Maria is that you talked about the speed of the spread of misinformation versus facts. And I just wonder if you have any observations of the power of convincing when it comes to one piece of misinformation versus facts and journalism. And also on the power of convincing, what do you think is the most important factors that gives that convincing power? Is it the how widely something is spread, the repetition of it, or there's something with the storytelling and the piece of content, like how it's written and told? And my last question is that how can we journalists, reporter, we don't control, with big institution, we don't really control too much about how like distribution and platforms. So how can we, in our day-to-day reporting and story constructing process, to make our story more convincing and invite more trust?
Wow, that's a lot. Let me just say, so first, in terms of, we need to first find money for journalism, right? So the first part is that, it's part of the reason I spend chunks of my time with the International Fund for Public Interest Media. Mark Thompson, who's the former president of the New York Times, and I co-chair this. Last year, we raised $50 million of new money for journalism. In this interim period, when there's nothing there, we need to find money. We cannot continue doing our jobs if we don't, right? So that's the first, I think. The second is, we journalists dive into the details. We spend lifetimes learning how to tell great narrative stories to keep people's attentions. In this day and age when social media uses fear, anger, hate, and lies, it's against us, right? No matter how well crafted your piece is, if Alex Jones is inciting a conspiracy theory that would never have made it in the past to any large group of people, because the news organizations were the gatekeepers. We weren't perfect, but we were accountable. And I think that's the first. So what do you do as, I think the first is there are now organizations that are coming together that, help in things like this. You should use all of, I'm not a tech Luddite. We should use this stuff. There's things that we can use. I mean, one of the things I use all the time is Pinpoint, which is you dump large documents and it'll come up and pop it at you. You look for the things that you need. How to tell better stories. Maybe I leave that with Raney because, I gotta say, part of it is I try not to be defeated by this. We cannot be defeated by this because the mission of journalism is more important today than it has ever been. We're in the last 2 minutes of the game of democracy, right? You play basketball. It's the last 2 minutes, and we have to take the shot. I think part of the reason I keep going is, and I really literally am chasing my shadow sometimes, is because I feel like when we look back a decade from now, we're gonna wanna know we did everything we could at this moment in time. So young journalists looking for what, you have also so China is another thing that we can talk about, right? But I think you have to infuse your energy, the young journalists today have to do so much compared to when I was, you have to have, as my Rappler said, the median age in Rappler is 23 years old. And what they always say is that they have to have 2 brains and 23 hands. So, and the crafting of how to tell a story, which is why we have to think about distribution really carefully, because it's not just the craft of how to tell a story, but it is also how do we get it distributed that we no longer have that power. Sorry, it's hard to answer your question with details, but let's talk. I can give more specifics, but I'm sure Raney does, because she does this on a...
Yeah, we can talk too. Great, yes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tasneem Raja. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Oakland Side and a co-founder of the Cityside Journalism Initiative, which has 2 local newsrooms in Berkeley and Oakland. I've been a journalist for 15 years. I've spent half of that time in local news and half in national. And I expect to spend what I hope will be the rest of a long career in local, because that's where I see some of the greatest opportunity to perform that role of interruption, to perform that role of civic engagement, of unlocking money that hasn't traditionally gone to journalism because we didn't have a model, through which that could happen. That's not to say that the toxic sludge doesn't exist at the local level. Anybody who was, in Oakland or Berkeley for the last local elections can tell you it is very much alive and real, in a way that mirrors what we're seeing, at the national, international level. What advice do you have for those of us who are responsible for news, but also that work of building democracy, rebuilding democracy, engaging people in that work, in truly on the ground, like we're talking about, like my neighbors, our readers? What advice do you have for those of us who are in the position of doing it local?
I love that you asked that, thank you. I just want to say one word to give you a second, that, local, we're really committed to the local space too, and your work is really important. One thing that I was thinking a lot about, and Richard and I were actually on a night commission and we studied this, is the lack of trust really starts at the local level. So the lack of trust in us is that a lot of our local news organizations disappeared. We all know this. This is an old story. We talked about this at the symposium 4 years ago. The numbers are staggering. So the fact, if we have any hope here, the fact that we see these burgeoning, smaller, but really righteous news organizations popping up all over the United States and the world that are nonprofit, I'm biased, of course. I really want to just say hats off. That's great. And now she will give us a reality check too.
No. Look, I think the part of the reason why it became news deserts was because the business model. And this is as much death by 1,000 cuts, right? So we're making do with the crumbs because the big chunk has been taken up by micro-targeting. Right? So that's the first step, which is one of the reasons why I still feel there must be, if the legislation kicks in, right? I really love it when a big tech billionaire says, we have millions a day, that would mean we would have to hire more people to actually, so I'm like, yeah, we'll hire. It took me a year to set up the Jakarta Bureau because I actually had to hire lawyers. I had to go there, right? They expanded globally immediately without any of the roots in each of those places, nor the accountability. So now you're working local, but part of the problem that we have for a democracy is that local we must expand our shared reality, right? So we do, in the Philippines, what we realized was hyper-local teams would give us national issues, right? And it could be something, and oftentimes we're doing this at the crumbs level. Again, you go to a Department of Education meeting, and then you find out, and you find that this is important, but you're fighting uphill all the time. So one of the things we found that worked with the Facts First PH pyramid was that the hyper-local news organizations, small, 3-person, 4-person, working with the large national news organizations, everyone at that first layer grew because Baguio Chronicle, which had 3 people, they had more courage than that corporation, I won't name which one, and because we were all working together, that courage from Baguio Chronicle actually infused courage into all of the layer 1. So Baguio Chronicle as a hyper-local, as a city, it's in Baguio City, actually had one of the top highest growth in terms of both reach on their social, but also content, because they're also every week they took all the fact checks we did like a Creative Commons for everyone, and then in that second layer, the mesh, there were artists who would wrap some of the fact checks, cartoonists so they not only printed it, so they had less, this was like work done for them by other news groups, but they also had greater reach. And the larger news organizations like us also grew, because those are the boundary spanners. You know how things spread, right? The 3 ways. If you're already a broadcaster and you're a social network, say you have 1 million followers, those 1 million followers aren't as connected to you as the niche. These are 3: the broadcaster, the boundary spanner, or linker, and the niche. The niche would have like less than 1,000 followers. But every one of those thousands are family or friends of that person. So if they say, oh, I really like this movie, their family and friends will follow what they say. So in some ways, the way to have a cascade, an information cascade, is the reach of that. Right? So the boundary spanner of Baguio Chronicle allowed the large national news groups to actually grow in their neighborhood, so collaboration.
Okay. Oh, wow, we have 2 more questions. Okay, before we end, we have 5 minutes, all right? We're going to try to do this. I'm a TV producer, so we're going to try to end on time. Okay.
My name is Peter Shear. I'm a First Amendment lawyer. I certainly, you've mentioned a number of times the importance of a shared reality, or the lack thereof, it seems, most of the time. And there is, it occurs to me, there is something out there that does represent for many of us at least a part, and a rather substantial part, of a shared reality. And what I have in mind is Wikipedia.
Yes.
And I wonder, first, in the ecosystem that you have been describing, it has first of all always been, to my mind, extraordinary that Wikipedia has continued to exist.
Yes.
And has taken on rightly a reputation of credibility that certainly I think I and most of my friends 20 years ago when it started, thought it would never have. And back in that day, if you can recall, kids in school were being told, don't look at Wikipedia, it's all lies, don't look at Wikipedia. But it is obviously not all lies. It is a repository of the truth as best as we can know it collectively through a small army of very dedicated and very smart people. There isn't a whole lot of transparency about it, but nonetheless, it is there. And I wanted to ask you, why is it not a much more potent counterweight to lying as a business model?
Yeah. The easy one is because why does Wikipedia work? Because the system of rules are very clear. And the community, the self-regulation part of that community came after a long time, right? And then the other part that's fascinating with them is they take apart. So one of the things that happened in the Philippines during the Marcos time is all of a sudden all mentions of the hidden wealth of the $10 billion started disappearing, right? And Wikipedia was able, because they are global. First, they are global, not American only, right? And they actually track those networks that try to change history in front of our eyes. When we brought it to them, I was very, very surprised at the way they worked. So the first is a clear system of laws. Transparency links back to it. Why doesn't it work as well as social media? Because it is a thinking slow process. It's still left brain. The right brain is the one that moves to that viral part, right? That's what I mean that, this insidious manipulation bypasses our thinking. right? It kicks into our amygdala by design because it just makes, this is where the interests of the tech companies and the dictators to be. And I'll do one last thing. Sorry, too many things is coming out, but like the one last part of this, I think, is please, your journalists, don't use misinformation, use disinformation. Because disinformation is like it's a target, it's a goal. The reason why identity politics, you can argue Me Too worked, yes, but Black Lives Matter. We have the data from the 2016 elections where this was attacked on both sides, because the goal is not to actually make you believe one thing. The goal is to make you distrust everything and fight. Russian disinformation attacked America at the cellular level, right? So anyway, to answer that, that's, I think, why. Can it be better? Can we use it? We can't do better until we stop the factory of lies, because we're still putting it in here. Richard may have more, and Raney, we talk about this all the time, right? But I have
to make some films about it. We're going to make some documentaries, okay? We should just get to work. I got to get back to the edit room. This is,
Documentaries have a step ahead because they have a full context. But these...
It just takes the time. It takes the thinking slow. Okay. In the front, and then I'm going to take the final question after him. I have one final question after.
Oh, hi there. I'm Alan Zarembo. I'm the foreign and national editor at the Los Angeles Times. So glad, first of all, thank you so much. This is enlightening, and so glad to hear you talking about the business model. And, in thinking about how to pay for journalism, especially local journalism, it occurs to me, this is not an original thought, that there's an obvious place to look for the money, which is from tech.
Yes.
Tech intentionally or not broke it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about efforts underway to try to get tech to pay for journalism? Which ones you think are working or have promise? Are there any?
Yeah. This is something that we're really thinking about right now, because if you're a small group, you don't have the punching power of like the New York Times, right? Or LA Times is big, so you have way more power than Rappler would if we were here in the United States. But I think more and more simultaneous things are happening, right? Big news organizations. I'll talk Australia. The Australian government came up with a broadcast law that really benefited the Murdoch companies. Did it benefit the startups? Did it benefit independent news? Did it? And then when I look at, again, like Canada, and I look at the way power holds on to power. Because the reality is that so I'm a traditional journalist. I came from big corporate media, and the old business model is actually gone. We have to find a better way now. And I think that trying to regulate that by taking it directly from the platforms may not be the right way, because how do we negotiate that? How do we all have a seat at the table? One way to do it may be a tax, the way tax them for this, and then the question is, who is going to distribute?
Richard is nodding. Richard Gingras from Google, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, so this is part, but he's Google also, Richard. No, but so I don't know how yet, but we have to find ways, because what we're doing is we are saying we're okay with the crumbs. But we are actually doing the really hard work, and we're facing the dangers that are there. Yeah. Richard. Tax. But the other part is we should be talking and writing about it a lot more.
And it's wonderful that you're here, Richard.
So,
Thank you.
here too, I think there are approaches. And one thing that we strongly espouse is yes, but clearly you don't want tech companies in the middle of deciding, right? And you don't want approaches like Australia or Canada that bias it towards embedded players and against quality journalism for local communities and against emerging players. So I think there are sensible approaches if you can make it work in the world of politics. One approach is to say, first of all, don't focus on specific companies, focus on a behavior. Say tax digital advertising, fine.
Yeah.
We would likely be the largest contributors. Distribute it in a different fashion, in an arm's length fashion,
Right.
governed by others, not us. How you figure that out, great, but say experts, through criteria that are appropriate to the objective that we would like to address, meaning quality local journalism. There are approaches to this in some countries. The Canadian journalism tax credit was a good one, completely ignored when they decided to kind of break the internet with C-18. But I think there are models that we will get behind, and I think others should get behind. Now the challenge, as we saw in Australia, is those kinds of models are precisely what Mr. Murdoch does not want.
Because we're fighting power in
That's
this.
right.
Right? So what's fighting power in the sense of, would a lawmaker go against the biggest news organizations? Would they? Because that then could mean, because this is kind of a falling down of all of the old norms and laws we had for engagement. So a lawmaker goes against the largest broadcaster. Let's take it out of the United States. Goes against the largest broadcaster. Then that broadcaster starts doing negative stories, or they think that will. This is part of, I think, the problem. But maybe one of the things we should do is the journalists should think and come up with something for this, right? I know in the Philippines, I'll tell you in private later.
You know, 1,000 Cuts started out as a 90-minute film, and it actually expanded to 2 hours because it was so deeply interesting. We could just go on. I have a final question. I just want to bring it back to you. You know, clearly, you can just see in people's faces, you inspire us so much. Thank you.
You inspire me.
You're really amazing. I consider you a colleague and a friend, and I had a question. You said there's 3 existing cases left. You've been doing, it's really, truly remarkable what you've been able to push away. How are things right now?
I could still go to jail for maybe 30 or 40 years. It was 103, so that's an improvement, right? I think part of it is it's how we manage it right now. You just have to, you compartmentalize and you keep doing. But, so I know this isn't the answer to the question, but I want to just leave you with 3 things if you're a news manager. The way we structured Rappler is the Venn diagram: tech, journalism, community. And we were in the circle, right? You need your community now, but it isn't through subscriptions alone. Civic engagement needs to get reinvented. Civic engagement in the age of exponential lies. You have elections coming up. So the tech part is the other part that we're not doing enough in. What do we do as journalists, right? Right now, I hope we started a platform, we started building a platform. So the cost of the legal cases in the first year and a half, my legal fees were $1 million. 50 million pesos. So first year and a half, that meant I couldn't build the tech that we were trying to build beginning in 2016, because the elevator pitch for Rappler was, we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism, right? Evidence-based, fact-based, so that you then can act in your world. We finish this, I hope now, Q3. So we need to think about new tech for how we build communities of action. I think we need to think about journalism, not just, we have to learn the craft, but then for those news leaders, like Raney is, you have to pull up and say, what is our purpose in our democracies and how do we get there in this time of creative destruction? Because everything in the old world is gone. And community is the last part. If you're like in a country like mine where I feel like my community was infected by a virus of lies. And so we try very hard to do that, but a rational a rational, thinking, slow way of dealing with it isn't get you there. So I do a lot more person to person. I do a lot more face to face. On World Press Freedom Day, we're bringing Chris Wiley into Manila to talk to. And it isn't just the people who read, it is the people who have power. Heads of businesses, the advertisers, heads of the universities, right? We have a lot of work that never used to be our work, but maybe that's also, this is the upside. Maybe that was work we needed to do anyway, right? And so I think we need to differentiate. It's almost like thinking of us as the stem cells now that will need to grow different skills. But the mission is significantly important. I'll answer Raney's question, which is, it's really tiring. It's really tiring, but it's also an inspirational moment, right? Inspirational because this isn't one of those run-of-the-mill times where you keep doing what you're doing. What you do, what you create. At Rappler, we feel like we're throwing spaghetti against the wall all the time and you have to throw it out if it doesn't work. This is it. Last 2 minutes. We gotta win, right?
Thank you so much, Raney and Maria.